Watch more programs like this on cable and stream with PCN Select. Subscribe at PCNTV.com.
Tim McMaster, Libertarian for Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania. Why are you running for this office?
I'm running for this office because at the end of the day, I have to look my kids in the eye, and I have to be able to tell them that I did something to make them freer than I was at their age.
So let's talk about the principles of the Libertarian Party.
Sure. So in a nutshell, it's don't hurt people or take their stuff. It's all about consent. We don't like to have the government tell us what we can and can't do with our bodies, what we can and can't do with our property, what we can and can't do with our being, our bodies.
And when did you discover the Libertarian Party, and what attracted you initially?
Initially, it was in 1992. I was a dumb teenage kid hooking school to go to the York Fair, and I saw the Libertarian Party had a stand there, and they were advertising that they wanted to legalize marijuana. And being a stupid 17-year-old, I thought, yeah, that'd be great, pot. But then as I started to look into it more, and I started to realize, like, hey, that really speaks to me. Not so much the marijuana, because I don't even, I really don't do that anymore since I turned 18. But what it spoke to me was the being in control of your own life, the having responsibility and having autonomy over yourself, and not forcing your will or your ideas onto others.
I'm interested, were there other young people around you at that time when you discovered the Libertarian Party in York that were interested too?
Probably, yeah. Like I said, a lot of us, we were just dumb kids at 18, hooking school. They were there to get out of school, and I was there kind of because I was the one that had the car, basically. So I was
That's always the popular guy.
Right, I was the wheelman, and so I was sort of took that responsibility a little bit personal, that, like I had to transport my friends from Gettysburg to York and get them home safely because I didn't want to have to deal with their parents and that whole thing. So I kind of took it seriously. So maybe I was a little more looking for something a little more at the fair than they were.
What does the Libertarian Party offer you that you can't get from either major party?
Autonomy. Pure and simple autonomy. I don't want the government coming in and telling me what I can't do with my property, what I can't do with my body. That I have to believe a certain way, or that I have to pay for certain things within the government that they want us to pay for, wars, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm interested in how your parents felt about your attraction to the Libertarian Party. Did they perhaps share your politics?
Not so much. My parents really didn't. We didn't really talk about politics too much. I kind of knew that they voted. But who they voted for, why they voted, or what issues they really spoke to them, we never really discussed that. We didn't have that kind of relationship.
Tell us about your background, Tim. Just what line of work are you in right now?
So presently, in addition to being a goat farmer, which is actually my passion, farming with my lovely wife and my two kids, I'm actually an IT infrastructure analyst for a healthcare company. So I've been working from home now since the pandemic for the last 2.5 years, which, while raising goats, is a pretty sweet deal, because if I get too stressed out at the job, I can walk outside and there's my baby goats, and it's hard to have a bad day with baby goats around.
So what's the attraction then of farming baby goats, and what do you do with them? So
we raise goats for meat and milk. So we process them there on the farm. We milk them there on the farm. I make cheeses, yogurts, stuff like that with the milk as well. It's just it's the freedom that being a farmer presents to you, that you walk out and everything that happens that day is essentially your responsibility. It's all about it's very management intensive. I'm not relying on the government, or I'm not relying on a neighbor for anything, or I'm not relying on an employer for anything. I take care of my goats, and in return, they take care of me.
Now, tell me more about the work you've been doing at home during the pandemic.
So it's IT infrastructure. We build VMs, virtual machines, for a healthcare company.
Virtual machine. Give me an example of that, Tim.
So basically, you would log into an internet browser that would be, and then you would go to www. Whatever the URL is, and it would bring up a computer, essentially, that doesn't really exist. It's a virtual computer, but it looks and acts and reacts like an actual computer.
Now, I understand you're the chair of the audit committee for Conewago.
Conewago, yes.
Sorry. Tell me about your responsibilities there. How'd you get that job?
So essentially, I got that job because I was the only one on the ballot. The Libertarian Party does this thing that we call the Moulton Maneuver, where we look for positions that don't have a Democrat or a Republican running for them. We go out and we collect signatures to get ourselves on the ballot, and then we campaign to get elected into these positions. The position of auditor in Commonwealth Township, as they have it defined, is actually pretty narrow. We essentially meet a few times a year. We approve a predefined budget and salaries for everyone, and then we go away, and they pay us $10 for the service. I'm taking it obviously a lot more seriously. I've been investigating to where all of their funds go, where all of our tax dollars go, all of the upcoming projects that they have, truly auditing their books. So I'm pretty certain they're not a huge fan of me.
So did it matter that you were a libertarian when you took this job?
I thought if you were going to be an auditor, if you were going to get into auditing of the public books, the public records, that's where you want a libertarian, somebody that is really concerned about, like, hey, maybe we shouldn't be taxing this much. Maybe we shouldn't be spending this much.
Now, give me an example or two of the kind of things that you've discovered as auditor that are really helping keep an eye on the books there.
So there hasn't been anything that's been out of the ordinary. What it is basically I just go in, and every time that there's a new building project that comes in, I request all the information on it, the building plans, the contracts, everything down to the traffic studies. If nothing else, it keeps them honest because now they know somebody else is looking at it as well.
Now let's talk about the responsibilities of the position you're running for, which is Lieutenant Governor.
Sure.
And one of those responsibilities would be the Senate President. So as Lieutenant Governor, you would also be the President of the State Senate. So tell me about that position's duties as you understand them.
So as I understand it, it's basically just kind of it's sort of the referee of the State Senate. He calls them to order. He maintains decorum. He says you may speak now, you may not speak now. It's really administrative at best.
Sir, for past lieutenants governor, there's a learning curve then. How much do you know about parliamentary procedure? It sounds like you're ready to be a referee and take care of disputes.
So it's funny that you bring up parliamentary procedure. I have actually been studying to become a parliamentarian. So I'm pretty versed in Robert's rules.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of...
So tell us about some of the more interesting rules that you've learned about as far as parliamentary procedure goes.
Yeah, so a lot of it is basically just how to keep meetings running in order. Robert's rules doesn't tell you how your meetings should run. It tells you the steps to run an effective meeting. So it's basically it's sort of the traffic cop, if you will, of having a meeting. So
now some senators turn up the heat during debate. Are you sure you're ready to move in there for decisive action?
Well, as we were discussing earlier, I am a former pro wrestler, so getting involved in sort of altercations like that, I don't think I'll have any problems with that. I mean, you can probably tell by looking at me, I'm not a tiny fella. So, getting in there and being, not really throwing fisticuffs because that would violate the non-aggression principle. But, just kind of being in there and being in the way. And when I want to, I can turn on the dad voice.
Now that you bring up the non-aggression principle of the Libertarian Party,
Right.
I take it. Expand on that and why that's appealing to you.
So as I said earlier, it's basically don't hurt people and take their stuff. And the non-aggression principle, as we understand it, states, that you will not use physical force or intimidation to achieve social or political goals. So it's all about consent. So if I want you to do something, task X, Y, Z, I'm going to try to convince you to do that.
use rhetorical force.
Right. I'm going to try to convince you. I'm going to try to convince you of the wondrousness of my argument to perform this task. But what I'm not going to do is twist your arm to go do it or threaten you, like, if you don't do this, you're going to go to jail. So it's all about the consent.
Let's talk about another responsibility of Lieutenant Governor here, and that would be being on the Board of Pardons. And tell us briefly what they do.
So that's something I'm actually super excited about because I'm a big believer in if there's no victim, there's no crime. So one thing with being in that position, I would use that to immediately restore the rights and pardon anyone would come before the board for a victimless crime. And you can read that to mean marijuana possession or anything like that, because marijuana is effectively legal in Pennsylvania now. So there's no reason why
at least medical marijuana is.
Right, but let's be realistic. The police they're not really going to enforce it too much, knowing that it's legal now. So with it being it's effectively legal or mostly legal or partially legal, there's no reason why you should have that stain, why anyone should have that stain on their record for a product that's legal mostly now and probably within 5 years will be completely decriminalized nationwide.
Now, when the Board of Pardons grants the the Board of Pardons grants a pardon.
Right.
What's the difference between that and a commutation of sentence?
So a commutation of sentence, it will basically stay on it's still on your record. It's basically saying you've served X amount of your time, but you're still a convicted felon, or you still have this on your record. Whereas a pardon basically says, like, it was on your record and now it's not. So it doesn't show up on your job searches, your credit history. It probably still shows up on your military history, but honestly, there is a learning curve, as you said earlier, so I haven't researched that deeply as if a pardon will stay on your military record.
So it does sound like you're looking forward to that position.
That part of the job especially, yes.
And as far as recommending executive clemency is concerned, that's something the Board of Pardons can do too, right?
Yes.
And that means telling the governor, or making a recommendation to the governor.
Right, it will be telling the governor, this person has, is in jail or has been convicted of X, and I think you should issue them clemency because of these reasons.
Right, and that's merely a recommendation. The governor still makes the final decision.
Right.
And what kind of information does the Board of Pardons collect? I mean, what do they look at to determine if someone is eligible for or should get a pardon?
So as I understand it, they look at your record within the community, if you've had any slip-ups with, recidivism or anything like that, if you were a prompt taxpayer, if you have any outstanding debts, or if there's been any warrants or anything. So it basically looks at your record from the time that you were released to the time that you submitted the pardon, or the request for the pardon, sorry.
You told us about your position on marijuana, but what other changes might you recommend for Pennsylvania's criminal justice system?
So that would be the big one. I'd also like to see, quite honestly, I'd like to see prostitution made legal, decriminalized. And I catch a lot of heat for that on occasion, but I think my rationale is correct on this.
Go ahead.
When these sex workers are assaulted or they're abused or they have money stolen from them or anything like that, in the course of doing this job, they have no recourse to come out, because if they say, or if they call to the police and they say, I'm a sex worker and I was just assaulted by a client, they're in danger of going to jail themselves. So if you remove that illegality from that, now they can come out and they actually have some recourse against folks who may have done them wrong. So I just think it's another case of bodily autonomy, because of all the things that you can do to somebody. Trading sex for money is not, that's not the worst thing that you could do. And I want to be very clear that I'm not talking about consent. Consent is key in this.
What else can state government do to help with second chances after prison?
So prison has largely just turned into a punishment system. There's no real attempt at rehabilitation or teaching a skill or anything. There's some programs out there that do, but for the most part, once you're in prison, you're a prisoner, and there's no, I want to take this course or I want to take that course and try to improve my life for when I get out. I can tell you a real quick story of my friend Dave Womack, who was elected borough councilman down in Dallastown. 20 years or more ago, he was, like myself at the time, a very stupid teenage kid, did something very bad, caught a felony. 20 years later, that felony is still haunting him. Dave is a pillar in the community. He is probably one of the most upright and righteous human beings I've ever met in my life. He's a great father. He's a great husband. He's a business owner. But he can't serve on the borough council because he was a felon, because he committed some stupid crime. He was a part of some stupid crime 20 years ago. And that's absurd. You shouldn't be punished for the rest of your life for the worst day of your life.
So let's talk about the third major responsibility of Lieutenant Governor, and that would be to be the chair of the PA Emergency Management Agency, otherwise known as PEMA. And what kind of job, what kind of work would you like to do there? So
the first thing that I would do for that was I would start pressuring the legislature to pass Defend the Guard legislation. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Did you say defend the guard?
Defend the Guard.
Yeah, tell me about that.
So what that is that basically makes it unconstitutional for the federal government to call up the state's National Guards without a congressionally declared declaration of war. So it would keep the National Guard here in the state of Pennsylvania. And, PEMA, that is, the National Guard is basically their foot soldiers. It's their, it's their first line of defense if you will, in any major disaster. So having them here instead of overseas fighting in a war would drastically help, PEMA.
Now, Tim, let's talk about your website. You have a website
Sure.
about your candidacy out there, and you enumerate several issues you'd like to work on. As Lieutenant Governor, you might not get that opportunity, but I see these are issues you feel strongly about. For example, reducing the property tax was on your website.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no reason why you should have to use money that you've earned that's already been taxed to buy a house that will then be taxed, to then continue to be taxed just to live there after you've already paid it off. At that point, you don't own anything. You're just renting it from the government.
And I understand you support changes or things that would benefit small businesses. That's on your website,
yes,
too.
Yes, absolutely. Lowering regulation. And one thing that's very near and dear to me as a farmer is a lot of the regulations on cottage industry, food production. For instance, the example that I always use is clean food. So the government says, the USDA says you have to have this massive infrastructure to be able to produce meat or milk or cheese. But then that they will, in the same breath, tell you that the reason for that is to make sure that there's clean food. If the goal was clean food, does it matter if it comes out of a $2 million facility or if I can get the same clean food out of my kitchen? You start taking away some of these regulations, some of these hurdles, these obstacles for small businesses to start up, cottage industries to start up in mom and pop's garage or running out of their basement on their farm. You're going to start creating a lot more jobs. You're going to start creating a lot more entrepreneurial opportunities. And once you do that, like the economic engine of Pennsylvania is going to thrive.
Here's another item I saw on your website. What's your position on gun rights? Of course, we've had a lot of gun violence in our country over the past several years.
So as much as I like the Second Amendment, I actually like the Pennsylvania State Constitution's Article 1, Section 21 a lot more because I think it's a lot clearer. And it basically says that the right to own firearms in defense of your person or the state shall not be questioned. And I think that sums it up quite clearly. It shall not be questioned.
So let's go on to your campaign.
Sure.
How do you go about campaigning for a position like Lieutenant Governor? After all, some members of the public might not know a lot about the responsibilities that we're talking about in detail here today.
Right. So this is a good first step, getting out and talking to fine folks like yourself and PCN here. We just did 3 great events out in Pittsburgh where we got out and we met a lot of people in the public in the area, in Latrobe and Edinburgh and Pittsburgh proper. So it's getting out and it's actually meeting people, myself and Matt Hackenberg.
What are they saying to you, these people out on the road when they meet you?
A lot of them say, like, what the hell is a lieutenant governor?
No kidding.
Yeah, and I explained it, and it's kind of flippant. I'll say, like, well, it's sort of like the vice governor, in that I would be governing the vices, which usually gets a pretty decent laugh, but, it makes sense. And then I can throw into the lieutenant governor's actual responsibilities are president of the Senate, in charge of the pardon board, PEMA, et cetera, et cetera.
Now, I'm guessing there must be some curiosity about the Libertarian Party. How about
Usually,
questions
yes.
about that? Well, what's the most common question you'll hear about the Libertarian Party? And maybe some people have some misconceptions about the party?
Yeah, so the biggest misconceptions we get are that we're either A, Republicans who like weed, or B, Democrats that like guns. Personally, I do like guns, but I'm not a Democrat, and I don't like weed, but I'm not a Republican. That's the biggest thing. They lump us in and say that we're in the middle, we're non-committal. And I think that's kind of a fallacy because what we are is committed to consent. The Republicans want to take away your rights, for instance, in the bedroom. The Democrats want to take away your rights to defend yourself. We believe you should have all of your rights.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good lead into this next question, because when voters go into the polls and they see your name amongst these other, perhaps better known names in major parties, what do you want them to think about? What is really separating you from those candidates in the major parties?
The biggest thing is that we want to just leave you alone. We believe that nobody knows how to run your life better than you do. Right? I can't tell you how to run an interview program. You can't tell me how to raise goats. You are the best you that you can be. I am the best me that I can be. And the government should just not be involved in that as little as possible.
I understand you ran for state senate just a few years ago.
Just last year.
What part of the state, and tell us about that experience?
So that was in the 48th district, which was all of Lebanon County and 4 townships each in Dauphin and York County. That was a lot of fun. That was my first foray into politics itself.
How did you handle that race? What did you campaign on?
So I campaigned basically on, I'm a libertarian and I want to leave you alone. Didn't get a whole lot more complex than that. It was a very deep red district. In fact, it's so deep red now that because a libertarian ran there and pulled nearly 4.5%, which is pretty astounding for considering a libertarian had never run in that district before to pull 4%. They actually gerrymandered my part of the district completely out. So now I'm in the 47th district instead of the 48th district. They completely shifted it to the other side of Lebanon County.
What did you learn from that race in 2021 that you can apply to your current race for the office of Lieutenant Governor?
That the best thing to do is just get out and talk to people. Talk with people. Don't talk at them. Don't talk around them. Don't talk about them. Talk with them. Hear what they have to say and genuinely care. And I don't think you're getting that from Austin Davis or Kerry Del Rosa. What you're getting from them is our candidate is not the other guy. You know, whereas Matt and myself, we're campaigning on this is who we are, this is what we believe, and we believe that you can run your life better than the government.
Now, when you've met Pennsylvanians out on the campaign trail, just what is it they're saying to you that perhaps surprised you and gave you some pause as far as how you should shape a campaign?
You know, a lot of it has been that when you actually talk to these folks and you don't initially start out with, hey, I'm Tim, I'm a libertarian. You know, you just say like, hey, I believe this. What do you believe? What do you believe on this? What do you believe on that? And then after a few minutes of conversation, they will actually look at you and go, I think I might be a libertarian too. And I'm like, yeah, I think most people deep down really are, because we just don't want the government telling us how to live our lives.
Now, Lieutenant Governor often takes on extra projects beyond the duties we've discussed. So what else would you like to work on that you'd like to bring up as your cause?
So I'd really like to use, because the governor's residence is the State House. And as we discussed earlier, I only live about 20 minutes from Harrisburg, so there's no way I'm going to drive all the way out there to live. My animals would never forgive me for that. I'd like to turn that into a learning farm where you could actually teach people how to grow their own food, grow their own vegetables, grow their own, maybe chickens, how to can foods, how to preserve foods. Like these basic skills that my grandmother taught me when I was 6 or 7 years old that to this day I still practice. Because I think if you can give somebody those kinds of skills, they'll never, ever be in a situation where they're worried about where their next meal is going to come from, because they know they can grow it.
Tim, we have about 2 minutes left. Use that remaining time to tell our viewers why they should elect you Lieutenant Governor.
So I don't think you should elect me for Lieutenant Governor. I think it's a position that probably should be outlawed. It's at best a part-time job. You could hire an administrator fresh out of school, give them a copy of Robert's Rules for Order, and they could probably handle 90% of the job. Honestly, I'd like to see the state legislature take a 50% pay cut. I mean, they barely work part-time hours as it is now, and they're getting, what's the minimum senator make now? $93,000, $94,000 a year.
In that neighborhood?
Yeah, to work a few days a week and have 7 to 8 weeks off a year. Like, those are great hours. I'd love to have that. But that's coming out of all of our wallets, my wallet, your wallet, the folks watching at home, that's coming out of their wallets. These positions should be part-time positions at best. There's plenty of states in the union right now that have part-time legislatures, Texas being one of them, and I don't think anybody's going to say that Texas has a bad economy or that Texas isn't doing great.
Last question, what do you like best about campaigning?
Best about campaigning is meeting new people and talking to people and actually learning what really inspires them, and seeing the look in somebody's eyes when it seems like I've inspired them. That I think I meet somebody new and they say like, I might run for something next year because of you. Like that swells my heart and makes me feel, like, hey, I'm doing the right thing here.
Tim McMaster, Libertarian for Lieutenant Governor, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.